Oh, good. All right.
Welcome, everybody. It's another week for the Transform Your Birth podcast. And with me today, I have the lovely Nicole. And Nicole's reached out to me to share her story. And I think we'll just kick off, Nicole. You were welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Now, you were living in another place and you found yourself pregnant. How was that for you, and what sort of went into your decision making around where you wanted to give birth?
Sure. So yes, we were living in Vanuatu at the time, and my mum was in Brisbane. And whilst we did have a couple of friends who had given birth in Vanuatu, I also knew that wanted to be back around family and friends during that time and have some different options for how I wanted to give birth. In particular, I had a friend who was a few years in front of me in terms of having her first child, and she'd had a really positive experience using hypnobirthing, and she'd then gone on a whole journey after that to then write a book about preparing for motherhood. And she was kind of my friend guru, I guess, in a way. And what she had shared and described certainly encouraged me to be able to have different options available in Australia. So we planned to come back, and the latest that you can fly internationally is 35 weeks. So we plan to come back at 35 weeks and then have about 3 months in total in Australia before we went back to Vanuatu. Yeah, that's how we kind of decided that we wanted to come back.
Yeah.
But then as it went along, we've realized that there were certain choices available to us as to the care that we needed and wanted if we wanted to have the kind of birth that we were hoping for.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of decision making did you end up going through in order to choose the model that you were able to use?
Yeah, so we really, as I said, kind of following from what my friend had experienced and others who I'd been speaking to, we wanted to try for a natural birth, and ideally in a birth centre. And so in Brisbane, the only way to get into a birth centre, if you're unable to go through a continuity program in the city, is with a private midwife. So luckily, and I didn't realise at the time, in Queensland they have a system where private midwives can be the delivering midwife in the hospital. And so we engaged with a private midwife to be able to help us navigate our way into the birth centre. And that ended up being a great decision overall, because not only did we get to have a birth in the birth centre, but we also got to have her before, and we had visits with her before we gave birth and then obviously after. And so I didn't really interact with the rest of the system apart from her, which for me was also quite good, because my first experience in that hospital had been with a miscarriage. And so it meant going through a private midwife that I could just have all my visits at home. I didn't actually have to go to the hospital and have that sort of anxiety come up again, which was actually a really good thing in the end. And yeah, we had fabulous support through our midwife, Karen, and then again, my friend who I was looking up to, she, in her kind of investigations to write her book, had learned more about doulas and connected with a great doula in Brisbane. And so she recommended a doula as well. And because, I was very out of my depth, having a baby, was pretty good at doing most other things alone, but this one was very out of my league. In talking to our doula, and she'd also written a book too, and sort of reading that really convinced me that I couldn't have enough support. And particularly, again, because we were outside the country, we were outside the system, you know, I didn't have any other access to good support systems in Brisbane at the time. So for me, it just made sense to kind of surround myself as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And,
so
you know,
it was very fortunate that you had a midwife who had visiting rights to the hospital, because a lot of independent midwives work very hard to try to get visiting rights. And what that actually means is that they can offer primary care. So the hospital's there to back that midwife up if she needs it, but primarily the care sits with that midwife. A lot of private midwives have to operate outside of the system, and they typically do home birth. But every now and then you'll find one who has managed to jump through those hoops, pardon me, has managed to jump through those hoops and get themselves what's called visiting rights. So if you are looking at getting a private midwife, you can ask that question: does she have visiting rights? Now, if she does, what that means is that she becomes your primary caregiver. If she doesn't, and you decide to birth at home and then you need to transfer, she can still be there with you and to support you, but she won't have primary care rights. So that's something that's, worth pointing out. So, Nicole, you ended up getting a private midwife who did your primary care and a doula. What was the different roles that each one of them took on in caring for you, both prenatally, during the birth, and postnatally?
Yeah, I think with the private midwife, she was definitely focused on more of the mechanics of birth, I guess, and then, you know, the mechanics of breastfeeding and looking after a baby when she came. So it was more around navigating the system, understanding the kind of the physiology around birth. She did my checks, and she, you know, did all of those things that I would have expected her to do, but really, I guess really focused on that side of things. Our midwife really was kind of like an elder, in that she really took us and thought about what we were going through emotionally. You know, it was all about how we're going to manage as a couple when we had the baby, what we were thinking about, how we could both prepare a birth plan, but looking at, well, what things could go differently to that, and how could we adjust as we needed to. She really just kind of created a really safe cocoon in some ways. And so that was kind of beforehand. Once I went into labor, so I was coming up to 41 weeks. I had a check from the midwife to see where Alia was fitted, and you know, if she had engaged or not. She, at that point, just sort of 2 days before I was 41 weeks, she was not engaged at all. And the check that the midwife did was not even on any form of scale of engaging. And so I then was doing all of the things that I could to help that along. And I did acupuncture, and I went to the chiropractor, and I did the uneven walking, and I did all of the things that I possibly could. And then I did have a stretch and sweep by the midwife the next day, I think, again, as a way of trying to speed things up, but without a medical induction if possible. But because I was so not engaged at that time, 2 days or less than 2 days later, when my waters broke spontaneously, and I started having contractions, we called the midwife, and we called our doula, and both of them were like, I think you've still got a little bit of time, thinking about the where that Alia wasn't engaged at all 2 days before. But the nice thing was that they also communicated with each other. And so they both had a good understanding of what was going on. And so that then when we called back, not long after, again, they were able to communicate and go, okay, well, what's necessary, who's necessary to come when, what can we do? And so it ended up being that our doula kind of coached me through a lot of the early contractions, and then she was on the other end of the phone when my husband was like, I don't think Nicole can do this. She's like, she feels like she's in transition already. What do I do? And she was just so fundamental in being like, it's okay. This is normal. She's going to be okay. You can do this and I'll come over, so she came over. So sort of my waters broke at about, say, 9 p.m. And then I started having regular contractions by about midnight, 1 o'clock. And then our doula came over to the house at about 4 or 5, I think. And she, at that point, was again just sort of a sense of peace and reassurance, and she massaged my back and, helped me into different positions that were comfortable, and just was there as this kind of like blanket of reassurance, really, for both myself and my husband, who, whilst we'd both done a hypnobirthing class, he was very on board. He did all the things right, but having her there was just that extra support for him too, and reassurance when I was kind of struggling at different points and things like that. So she was incredible at that. And then she came with us, and then they were both there at the hospital when we arrived. And again, whilst our midwife was, again, taking on her clinical role and doing all the necessary things that she had to do, and there's so much for them to do, our doula was still able to be there with me and to help coach me and to help support my husband through the remaining kind of hour or so of labour in the hospital. Before then, I was able to have a beautiful water birth. And so, I just...
So let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
The doula is often more hands-on in the labour, so they'll often help you to find comfort. They certainly support you emotionally. They do a lot of emotional preparation too, practical preparation, to checking in around your support to prepare when Bubby arrives. One of the things that people often get concerned about when bringing on a doula into the birthing space is that they could potentially replace the partner or cause the partner to take a backward step, or get between the mother and the partner. What would you say to that?
In our case, absolutely not. I think she was there for us, and so, it was my husband who was holding my hand as I was contracting each time, and I would wake him up, from his micro sleeps as I was having a contraction. But it was our doula who, was behind us and helping me in other ways, so that it wasn't an extra strain on my husband to kind of help manage me as well. He was there and he was doing his job and his role extremely well, but he didn't have to take on a whole other role. And also the communication between the doula and the midwife was able to be happening, and she was able to communicate my needs, my desires, what was happening, without him having to do all of that as well. So it kind of freed him up to be with me while our doula and midwife kind of worked collaboratively together in the background.
And what you're describing there is there's enough work for everyone.
Oh yeah. And I think that's what I realized was, even getting what could seem overkill of support. But as I said, I've done lots of other things on my own before in my life, but this was one time where I was like, bring on
Bring
the
it on.
support. This is, this is only going to happen. Well, in my case, it only ended up happening once. And yeah, it was worth every cent, and I think a lot more, to just feel supported and not at sea, with anything that happened along the way. And just knowing that I had multiple people who knew me, who knew what I wanted, who could help to negotiate it if anything did change or go wrong, and just not being worried about having to deal with that in the moment was invaluable, really.
Yeah, no, doulas are worth their weight in gold. I was a doula for a long time as well, and I saw very much my role as supporting the couple, not just the mother. And there were times where you could sense that there was some lovely connection going on, and you'd just take a backward step, or you'd leave the room, and having that sensitivity to kind of read the situation, read what's going on in the labour, support the partner to support the mother, reassure them, take the pressure of that, needing to be on top of everything away, and to really act as a buffer between the couple and the medical side of things, which is there to be a safety net, but, not necessarily needed most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So for those listening, a lot of the people who come onto this podcast have done some form of preparation along the lines of Transform Your Birth or Calm Birth or hypnobirthing. And those 3 programs are very strongly based in the understanding of the role of the mind in birth. And they're very, very well respected courses and ways of helping women to prepare for birth. Tell us how the experience of doing hypnobirthing changed the way you approached your labour.
Yeah, very different for me, and then completely different for my husband.
Right.
So I guess I went into it with a bit more of an open mind, I guess, and a bit more of a, wanting to trust my body and do all of that. Whereas he was very much, as many of us understandably are, very much reliant on whatever the doctor says we do.
Yeah.
If the doctor says this, we follow the instructions, and that's all we do.
Yeah.
So for us, doing hypnobirthing course was actually very much just about feeling informed and having information about the physiology of birth, but also the role of the mind, as you say, and also the interaction with the system, and how you can say no to things and you can ask questions, and that things that happen might just be hospital policy. They might not necessarily relate to the individual situation of the birthing person. And so just that information was gold in terms of thinking about, well, we do have options. We can ask questions. There are different ways that we can go about this. And also then realizing even more the power of the body and mind together to be able to connect with the baby and birth. So I think that aspect of it was really important. It wasn't just the physical, emotional preparation. It was actually just that information and knowing that there's a lot more out there than we are told often.
I think that's a great point you're making, Nicole. I just want to pick up on that, because I think we are taught to trust doctors and midwives because they do know things that we don't, and rightly so. Like they're professionally trained, they're professionals. However, I think it helps to become aware of the system and how it works. And a lot of what governs and dictates hospital policy is based on certain people's opinions at the time, which is usually, hopefully, influenced by evidence and up-to-date evidence, which then forms policies which are there to assess risk. Now, that information's really helpful, when you discover that there's a greater risk of, if you go past 42 weeks or something like that, that information can be very helpful. However, you don't want to make decisions based on evidence about other people from other countries, based on research from those places. You want to make decisions based on what is going on in live time with your pregnancy. So risk assessment is one aspect. It's one part of the puzzle, but it isn't the full puzzle. So understanding the difference between a medical necessity and a choice, and being able to ask questions to get the information that you need in order to make the right decision based on your specific set of circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something we teach in our course, and we give people those questions, the ability to identify the difference between that medical necessity and, oh no, we've got choices. Are there any alternatives? Great question.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what we're not in the mainstream taught.
No,
you know, we're not necessarily taught that we have options. We're taught that we're told something and we have to say yes, you know, regardless. But I think that's also where having support people and having someone like a doula in the moment can also be helpful, because it can be difficult to make those kind of choices in the moment, you know, even if you know that you can. So having an advocate, and I think that's where the doula role, so luckily didn't have to play that role for us, but that was also what we wanted, to have her as an independent advocate for times when it would have been quite difficult to potentially make those choices.
Absolutely. And to be clear around that, doulas are not there to give medical advice. They're not qualified for that. But what they can do is help you to understand the landscape that you're traveling on, and where there might be wriggle room, and to often give you the questions, or, you know, ask the questions of the caregivers on behalf of the parents, so they can actually make the choices. So it's
almost like that bridge role.
Bridge of understanding, so the couples can discover what the actual decisions can be made on.
That's right.
What are the options? What are the options?
Exactly. So I guess then going back to the hypnobirthing course, and then in some ways I felt we were lucky, because of the times that we had to come back to Brisbane, we ended up doing it at that 20-week mark, because we were coming back for a scan, and we were probably one of the earliest in the groups that we were in. But in some ways, I think that gave me an advantage, because I then had a whole half of my pregnancy to listen to the meditations and visualizations and do the reading and additional preparation. And I think just by doing that, it was very evident when I went into labor. And as I said, it went from like 0 to nothing quite rapidly. And in labor, I also got nausea, which I hadn't expected. I was throwing up. Like, there were all these sorts of things that kind of just came at me quite quickly. I thought I'd have like a long lead-in time with my labor, and I had all these things planned of what I could do for the 24 hours when I was having occasional contractions, but that didn't work like that. So, you know, when I got into labor and that all kind of struck me, it was easy to start to feel panicky, start to feel anxious, start to feel stressed. And it was at that time where I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. And, you know, as my husband told me later, he was like, that's where he started to get scared, and he called, you know, our doula, being like, oh, what's happening? I don't know what to do. And she just advised him, because he was also stressed too. She's like, put on the hypnobirthing tracks, light a candle, get her in the shower, see how that goes. And once we did that, and I was in that space and I was looking at my candle, and I had the speaker playing the birthing, hypnobirthing tracks that I'd been listening to for the last 4 months, it automatically relaxed me. And I was able to get into the zone, and I was able to go through each contraction much more calmly, and it felt much more doable. Just because I'd kind of conditioned myself in some ways that's what I needed to do. I'd been going to sleep with these tracks for so long. So that, you know, was kind of out of my logical control, I would say, at that time. But yeah,
You
completely
did the
invaluable.
training. You did the training, and that's something so critical that a lot of, even when I've talked to midwives and doctors about what we actually do in our courses is, and to help them to understand how we down regulate the stress response through the training of the nervous system and the subconscious to be able to access deeper and deeper states of relaxation. And for the average woman, particularly, you know, in our lifestyle, we're so overstimulated. Being able to relax and let go and training yourself to do that prior to the big day changes the way women experience those sensations and changes labours. So it sounds like that automatic response just kicked in when you went back to those tracks and went, oh, I know what to do now. And your body just went whoop, straight in.
Yeah, it was quite remarkable, the difference. I mean, obviously I was in it, so I have some memory, but certainly, you know, when my husband tells the story, that was a big part of that shift, which then meant that we're able to go through it, you know, for the next few hours with a lot more ease, even though I was still, you know, very nauseous and had to, you know, like there was a lot of other stuff that was going on, but having that kind of anchor to come back to was just really, really important.
Beautiful. Nicole, can you recall how you experienced your sensations of labour? What they felt like?
The contractions or the
contraction.
very low. I think that was, you know, I think when you get Braxton Hicks, it's quite high in the belly, and I just remember this feeling, this very low pressure in my pelvis. And very intense. Certainly, you know, at first. But then, I think, as I said, when I was kind of had my breathing under control and had that focus, it was much easier to kind of ride the waves, you know, and that's one of the things in hypnobirthing. It's kind of the surges of the sea and the, you know, riding the waves of the contraction, and it really, it can actually be like that, to work through them. And
it's helpful to understand as well, when a woman's waters break, typically they break at the end. We always think, you know, every labour starts with waters breaking. Most of the time it happens at the end when the pressure's at its greatest. However, sometimes women's labours do start with waters breaking. And what happens then is the pressure, the baby comes down more fully onto the cervix. And it's the pressure of the baby's head on the cervix which releases the pulses of oxytocin. More pressure, more oxytocin, more intense the contractions. And typically the more efficient the labour, because the baby's really pushing at the door, because there's no membranes between them and the cervical doorway. So that's why women can go into quite strong labour, you know, very early on, after, not straight away when the waters break, but, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 hours later, when that baby starts to really sit on the cervix, then it can be very intense. So
that's I think what happened.
That's what you experienced.
She was very comfortable for a very long time, and then once she decided it was time, she's like, okay, time to go.
She was hanging back, and then she decided to make her entrance.
That's right, exactly.
Tell us about the moment of pushing her out. That must have been amazing.
Yeah, so we kind of got to the hospital maybe at about 6 o'clock or so, and laboured again for a little bit more in the shower and kind of on the floor, and then just towards the end we're able to get into the birthing pool, and had a few strong contractions in there. So as she was coming out, and again was listening to the tracks and working through those, and then once she, I guess I can't remember the exact, but I think once her head was almost out, I had a song that I had wanted to play when I was giving birth, and so I asked to put that on, which they did. And so when I was finally in the final moments of giving birth to her, I was able to sing this song. Yeah, so she came out in the
Oh,
water, and my husband sort of caught her, and then I got her straight on my chest as soon as that happened in the water. And yeah, I think we were it. Needless to say, we were quite beside ourselves as that happened. And yes, from all accounts, the midwives and everyone in the room also had a bit of a tear in their eye,
wow.
apparently, as that happened, because it was quite a beautiful song about sort of the sunrise, and it was at about it was about 7:30, so the sun had risen, but it was still early. So yeah, it was
Oh, I bet that song means a
an
lot to
ideal.
you.
It does, yes. It
Yeah,
still chokes me up a little bit when I
yeah.
listen to it now.
Wow.
Mm.
And when she landed, how was that? What was
Yeah.
that post-birth period like?
Oh, um, at home, you mean?
No, just straight after
Just
birth.
in straight
They put her
after,
on your
yeah.
chest.
They put her, yeah, I was holding her in the water. And then a funny story is that we didn't know if she was going to be a girl or a boy. And so, I was holding her, and then it was, the room was quite dark, and so the midwife asked my husband, have a look, is it a boy or a girl? And he's like, mm, boy.
He was
Just
having a kiss.
Yeah, because the genitals are quite enlarged, full of hormones at that time, and so yes, he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at, and then the midwife was like, "Shine the torch on there," and she's like, "Oh, Dad, have another look," and he was like, "Oh, girl, okay, good." It was very lucky because we really wanted a girl, even though neither of us, were saying that in case
Yeah, yeah.
it didn't happen. But yeah, so then once that happened, then we cried all over again because we were both so happy that it was a girl. But yes, it gave us all a bit of entertainment at that moment as well. But
Wow.
then yeah, so then after that, obviously we get out of the pool, burst the placenta, and cut the cord, and then I was able to kind of lay down on some um, cushions and mat on the ground and just have her on me, and and just experience that amazing moment of connection, and her kind of doing the mouth thing to
Yeah,
to find my breast, and kind of nuzzling up, um, little primitive creature like, really,
yeah.
to find that, and latch on, and that was a very incredible moment to have
Yeah,
that
to
time
watch.
with her. Yeah.
Yeah, what Nicole's describing there is babies have reflexes. When they're born, they have reflexes to look for the breast, of course, which makes so much sense. Any mammal would. They're looking for a nipple, even if they can't see, they can smell. And so our babies are the same. And if they're given the time and the space just on the mother's chest, usually it can take anywhere between minutes to an hour. They show the behaviours that they need to go looking for the breast, and it's in the journey to the breast that they learn good behaviours for good attachment. And good attachment is the key to good breastfeeding, less pain for the mother, and the stimulation of good milk supply. So self-attachment is a beautiful thing to create space for, rather than grabbing the baby's head and the mother's breast and putting the two together. Just let the baby find the breast. It's a beautiful thing to do. So it sounds like that's what you experienced.
Mm.
Nicole, what did you learn about yourself going through that experience?
I think that, well, certainly in the whole experience of um, before I had a successful pregnancy, I had 2 miscarriages. And so I think right from the very beginning, I learned that, unlike most other things that I like to think in my life, this was completely out of my control.
Yeah.
Um, and that I thus had to learn how to deal with it differently than everything else I'd done, up until that point in my life. Um, which then I guess probably led me down the path of seeking more support and just realizing how big this was, to do, and that I couldn't do it alone. I didn't want to do it alone. I didn't need to do it alone. And that it was okay to accept that support. Whereas typically I'm someone who's like, no, I'll be fine. I can do it myself. I don't need that help. But for this, I learned that A, I did need it, and B, it's really good to be able to accept that support, particularly at these sorts of times. And that it doesn't mean, it didn't mean that I was weak or I couldn't figure it out, but it meant that, I was able to have this experience that I honestly don't think that I would have had without that support. And it enabled me to trust myself in a way that I didn't come into becoming a mother with a maternal instinct. There was, I'd only really decided to have children a couple of years, if that, before I actually had my daughter. So, I was coming in blind in many cases to doing this. And so I think what I learned was, by A, getting support from others, and then B, trusting myself and just being okay with whatever came up and being okay with things being out of my control, it meant that I was fine actually to be at home a lot on the couch and just be feeding all the time. And be okay with that.
And to be okay with that.
And just to accept that that was what it was going to be. And we did, we had the luxury of not needing to go anywhere for 4 weeks before we got on a plane. But we gave ourselves that time. We didn't have any other commitments, and just trusting myself. And I think, in hindsight and speaking to many other mums since, like, that's not always the case. And so I feel very fortunate that, I had a healthy pregnancy. I had the support for the birth. Breastfeeding was, it was quite easy, relatively speaking. And so I think in many cases, that was a luck, in many cases. And then in other cases, I think, we did do a lot of preparation as much as we could. And I was, able to just sit back and take on the role of mother of, I'm feeding my baby, so I need to be fed and have tea and grapes. Thank you very much.
Peeled grapes, actually.
Peeled grapes, that's right, even better. And I wasn't afraid to ask for that. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, again, that was a very new experience for me, that learned that it was actually kind of nice to be able to do that.
But you didn't resist it. And I think there's so, women do resist it. And I can understand. I was that type of a woman too, independent, accomplished. Having to let go is a big, big lesson. But the gift of it is lifelong, because we truly aren't in control anyway. It's only an illusion that we are. And the quicker we get on board with that, the easier life becomes on the other side, because you just learn to roll with what is happening. And life with a newborn is very much about that. You just your days are all about responding to their needs, and you've just got to roll with what that is in the moment. Nicole, your story is a lovely story. You went into so much detail around your preparation and the things that made the biggest difference. Getting the right support, with both having an independent midwife who could give you that continuity of medical care and monitoring and keeping an eye on things, and also being a bit of an elder and a wise woman in how she was able to light the path for you to walk. And then having a doula who's very practical and also very skilled and supportive to help you and your partner through that time, particularly when it was intense. Doing the hypnobirthing course, which obviously made a big difference to your ability to relax and to really surrender to the sensations that you were having. and using music and the meditations as a cue to your body and mind that you have trained to be able to do that in the moment when it mattered most. And I think you highlighted how it's very easy to see how women can lose confidence in a situation that's very intense like that. But with the training that you did, you were able to hang on to that space, to that ability to relax with no resistance, and you welcomed a beautiful little girl into the world. And then she self-attached, bless her heart.
I know.
So
Good on her.
there's some great wisdom from Nicole's story for the listeners here today. And I hope you've gained a lot from what Nicole's shared with us today. Thank you so much, Nicole, for giving your time for this. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Tracy.
Okay, and we will hopefully see you next week for another story or some wise words from the Transform Parenting, Transform Your Birth podcast. See you later.